Welcome, everyone. This is our 58th episode of the Clements Bookworm. I am Angela Unk, Director of Development here at the Clements Library, and happy to welcome you to the program today. Just in case you are joining us for the first time, I will mention that we are recording today's broadcast to share with you later. You'll receive an email later this afternoon with all of the resources that we mention as well. So you'll see us putting those resources in the chat. My colleagues Ann and Kayla will be monitoring the chat, and we love to have you chime in. So please go ahead and change the setting to everyone and participate in the chat. However, if you have specific questions, please put those in the Q&A section. That helps to keep them together for the end of the program. And it also allows everyone to see the questions that are being asked. And if you see a question that you also have, you can give it a thumbs up, and that will send it to the top of the queue so that we don't miss it. We do have, as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, the live transcript turned on today. So take a moment to toggle that on or off as you see fit, and you can also change the size of the font. I have side-by-side mode enabled. I can only control so much of what you see, so please move the separator around to change the relative size of the slides and the speaker so that it best fits your screen. This program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library, located on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The Clements Library's mission is to collect, preserve, share, and promote the study and discussion of primary sources related to all aspects of the history and culture of North America to about 1900. I also want to acknowledge that the University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered ceremonially as a gift in the text of the Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids, so that their children could be educated in a Western manner. We acknowledge the history of Native displacement that has allowed the University of Michigan to flourish. Today, we reaffirm the contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabe ties to this land and their profound contributions to this institution. The William L. Clements Library also acknowledges that it has and continues to benefit from the original land dispossession and established hierarchies of settler colonialism. All right, and now if you haven't participated in the poll yet, click very quickly because I'm going to end it and share the results. Okay, so it's fun to see that many of you share expression through words and writing, and I suspect reading as well. So that's lovely to see, about 50%. And then many people also through the work of your hands. And I'd love at some point to hear more about what kinds of creations you all are making. And then we still have two people who say in another way, and I appreciate that some of you also through your listening ear and moving your body. So thank you for sharing that. I know that was a little more personal question than we sometimes ask. I'm delighted now to introduce Jason R. Young, who is the co-curator of the exhibit Hear Me Now, The Black Potters of Old Edgefield, South Carolina, which opens at the University of Michigan Museum of Art on August 26th. Jason is an associate professor of history at the University of Michigan. He is the author of Rituals of Resistance, African Atlantic Religion in Congo and the Low Country region of Georgia and South Carolina in the Era of Slavery, an exploration into the religious and ritual practices that linked West Central Africa with the Low Country region of Georgia and South Carolina during the Era of Slavery. He is also the co-editor with Edward J. Blum of The Souls of W.E.B. Du Bois, New Essays and Reflections. Young has published articles in the Journal of African American History, the Journal of Africana Religions, and the Journal of Southern Religion, among others. He is currently conducting research toward his next book project, To Make the Slave Anew, Art History and the Politics of Authenticity. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So I'm really delighted to have you here, and I am looking forward to hearing a lot more about the exhibit. Do you want to start out perhaps with an overview of the exhibit?
Yes, I'm happy to. The exhibit takes seriously and opens a conversation into a part of American slavery that we don't often think of, that we tend to think of American slavery through agricultural terms. We think about the cash crops that enslaved people produced, the sugar, tobacco, the indigo and cotton. And while a significant part of American slavery was devoted to that, there was also this other part of the slave experience, which was really industrial level production. And the show Hear Me Now focuses on one part of that industrial production as it happened in Edgefield, South Carolina, a really small place that has an outsized influence, both in the economy of the South and as well as the politics of the South more generally. And it's an important conversation to have, because while much of the products that enslaved people produced were consumed at the moment of their production, the tobacco was smoked, the sugar was sipped with tea, the cotton was worn bare, this is some material that still is with us in a very physical and present way. And there's a way for us to engage and commune with the history of American slavery, but also with enslaved people through these physical objects. And so I'm excited about the show. I'm especially excited about it because we're putting the final touches on the installation. I was in the gallery just last night, and it's one thing to plan things through Zoom calls and conversations and in two-dimensional spaces. Like, I've been looking at screens and papers and all of that in the development of the show. But now all of those two-dimensional plans are living in three dimensions in the gallery, and so I'm really excited about the opportunity for visitors to come and see the show.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I'm excited to see it in person too. Would you like to present for a little bit, and then perhaps we'll chat a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. We can move to the first slide and see what happens. So I'm going to show a couple of the images from the show, but also offer a little bit of context around them. I was mentioning the ways in which this material allows us to have a kind of direct physical relationship, conversation to the enslaved past. And this is one of the pieces in the show that is really touching. If I'm being perfectly honest, it's really touching for me and a kind of deeply emotional object. It is a shard. It's not a full pot. It's just a part of a pot. And it includes on the bottom a handprint of the maker. And we can imagine that an enslaved person who's working this at some point had some clay residue on their hands or some oil on their hands. They're moving this massive pot from one place to another. And when the pot was placed in the kiln, their handprint was in effect fossilized on to that pot. And so what you're looking at here is, you're quite literally touching the story in the past of American slavery and of enslaved people. It's an incredibly important object for me in the show. And we can keep moving. Next slide, please. Another aspect of the show, and I think one of the important interventions that this show makes into kind of museum spaces and what it means to be in a museum, is that we often imagine that the museum is the place where we hold the virtuoso pieces. It's for the finished, for the beautiful, for the final pieces. And the beauty and the expertise and the artistry of the many of the objects that are in museums is meant in a lot of cases to be readily apparent and always already evident to us. But this is a show, and this is an experience in the museum that really starts quite literally in the dirt. And what you're looking at here is what's called a waster pile. This is on a private property that historically was one of the sites of pottery production in the area. And as many of you know, when you're engaged in pottery production, when you're engaged in ceramics, it's a very hopeful and optimistic endeavor. And a percentage of things that you put in the kiln just don't make it out. They fail in the kiln, they crack, they break, they don't make it. And so as a result, one of the things that you often see in these pottery sites are what's called waster piles, where objects that for one reason or another didn't make it or didn't work will be moved to these piles. And when you're walking through these sites, and you'll see some examples of me walking through these sites a little bit later, when you're walking through it, just the very physical landscape of the environment tells the story of its history. All over the place in the ground, there are these shards and handles and lips from different pieces of pottery. And so you're quite literally walking over this history as you continue. Next slide, please. For this show, we've really leaned into what it means to be broken, to be reconstructed, to have lived a hard life. And these are objects that will be on view in the exhibition. The one that you see on the left is a reconstructed pot. A team of scholars from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign found and reconstructed these sites from one of the historical Edgefield potteries. In many ways, this pot helps us tell a bigger, fuller, grander story than even some of the beautiful finished pieces that are also on view. That's because we can look at the outside of the pot, but you can also peer inside. You can see maker's marks. There are fingerprints and handprints all over the material that's on view in this exhibition. And so you get to have a really close relationship, not only with the objects, but with the people who made the objects. We can take one step forward. Enslaved potters in and around Edgefield were engaged in producing a wide range of objects, This is, of course, in the 19th century, a time before plastics are used for the storage of materials. This is a time even before glass is available to the masses as a kind of cheap object that can be used for storage. Prior to that time, the vast majority of food storage and liquid storage and food service would have been done with ceramics. So part of what you're seeing are pots that would have been meant for market, that you buy, sell, and trade these throughout the South, and in fact, throughout the country. Some of these objects are made. The big, hefty pot that you see second from the left on the bottom is a huge storage pot, which we'll talk more about that in just a few moments. It's a big storage pot that would have been used to dole out weekly rations to enslaved people. You would have had salted meat or salted pork that is kept in those pots, and every week enslaved people would come to, in effect, a kind of dispersal center to get their week's rations of food. So those kinds of pots were very much in demand as a part of the Southern slave system. And you also see these face vessels, which are pots that African Americans made, not for market, not to be bought or sold, but when they were in the potteries and they wanted to express themselves, these are the objects that they made. They made these face vessels and then stuck them into the cracks and crevices in the kiln between and behind and around some of the other objects that were meant to go in the kiln. And so you'll see a range of different objects in this show, Hear Me Now. We can move to the next slide. Partly because this story is a story about archaeology, it's a story about history, it's a story about art, it's a story about ceramics. One of the things that the curatorial team has been committed to from the very beginning is a collaborative curatorial process that invites as many experts to the table as possible. So you see in this image, Adrian Spinozzi, a curator at the Met where the show opened. I'm in the middle, and to the right of your screen is Ethan Lasser, who is the curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And we have worked for years, really, as a collaborative team towards this project, but we never understood ourselves. We don't think of ourselves as the authorities of this material. We're simply the conveners, and we're in a position to bring more experts to the table. If we move to the next slide, we'll get another sense of that. One of the things that we have done from the very beginning is invite experts to the table. And so what you're seeing here are some of the people who've been invited and who participated in our audio guide. We have a pretty robust audio guide. And I have to say this as a plug for the audio guide. I think we have a link to it as well, which I'm sure we'll be able to put into the chat. But I happen to be a person who doesn't like audio guides when I go to museums. I don't want to hear the authoritative voice tell me what to think about the objects that I'm seeing. I'd rather just experience it myself. And because I typically don't like audio guides, when we were in the process of putting this together, I wanted to create an audio guide that I would like. Like, this is an audio guide for people who don't like audio guides. And so what you're seeing on your screen is Glenn Ligon, who's an artist and collector. Bumi Badebo is also an artist whose work is featured in the show. Vincent Brown is an historian. Brooke Bowers, an anthropologist. Tanya Matthews, to the bottom left, is the CEO of the International African American Museum. David Mack is a potter. George Kalfas is an archaeologist. Wayne Bryant is a local activist in South Carolina. We wanted to bring as many voices as possible into this audio guide. And not only do they add context to the material through their contributions in the audio guide, but they also disagree on things. So there's no one way to think about the material. If you listen to the audio guide, you'll see different perspectives and different ideas coming from different places. It's the audio guide that I would like to listen to. Related to that, the audio guide is important also as a way of giving people access to the show who may not be able to come to the Met, the MFA, to UMA, or to the High Museum in Atlanta where the show will close. So if you're not here, I think we saw someone in the chat who's from Brazil. I think they were coming in from Brazil. So they may or may not be able to come to UMA to see the show, but you can certainly interact with it through the audio guide. Next slide, please. The other thing that this show has required is, on the left of your screen, it's required us to get our hands and feet dirty. We've spent, I really can't count now how many times we've been to Edgefield, South Carolina, on these pottery sites, following the trail of this material. You see Ethan Lasser again, a curator from the MFA. I'm there. You're also seeing a member of the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources who was walking us through some of this material. His name is Sean Taylor. So we've been like on these sites and doing this work kind of on the ground, and in the process, like running away from snakes and mosquitoes, and like really being in South Carolina and everything that means in the middle of August. On the right, again, we've opened up this show to all kinds of input and output. And what you're seeing here is an early intervention that we had here at UMA. This was from last year, March, where we brought a bunch of people in to the museum to discuss, debate, and talk about what the show could look like from as many perspectives as we were able to manage. again, not because we were trying to apply our curatorial voice onto the show, but instead that we were trying to convene a conversation. It's really what we're trying to do with the show, is just convene a conversation. Next slide, please. I came into this material through my own research and work into the religious lives of African people and their enslaved progeny in the Americas. I've been following the trail of African religions, African religious objects, ritual practices, medicinal practices, and the like, and seeing how those religious and ritual practices operated in West Africa, and then thinking about how they were reimagined once enslaved people found themselves in the Americas. What parts of ritual practice were retained? What parts were adopted? What parts got introduced into African American Christian experiences and the like? And so as a part of that study, I've been thinking really seriously about what happens to ritual objects and religious objects as they travel across these spaces. And so what you're seeing here are two examples of ritual objects that were used in Congo, Angola, in West Central Africa. As it turns out, many of the people who found themselves enslaved in South Carolina actually hailed from this region in West Central Africa. And one of the interesting things about African American religious practice in the Americas is that it still bears the mark of this African history, of these linkages back to West Central Africa. And not only does it bear the mark in a kind of broad or hazy Mother Africa kind of way, but in fact, although the transatlantic slave trade became illegal in 1808, we know that captive Africans were continually brought to the Americas even after the transatlantic slave trade was made illegal. And one of the last slave ships that came to the Americas was a slave ship called the Wanderer that landed in Georgia. And many of the people who were on that ship found themselves enslaved in Edgefield area potteries. And so they were coming from a religious environment where they were creating ritual objects for their own purposes. And it is no mistake in my mind that when they find themselves enslaved in South Carolina, one of the first things that you start seeing is the production of face vessels. We'll see some examples of those in the next slide. So people who are making these ritual objects in West Central Africa find themselves enslaved in Edgefield area potteries and start making face vessels, which are not only aesthetically connected to an African past, but also in a really interesting way are kind of materially connected to an African past. You'll see both in the eyes and in the teeth of these objects, kaolin inserts. Kaolin is a kind of fine white clay. As it happens, kaolin clay can be found in abundance in West Central Africa, where it's used as a ritual substance. It just so happens that Edgefield, South Carolina is also a rich repository of kaolin clay. And so it's not at all a coincidence that people who saw this material as an important spiritual substance in their African homeland come to South Carolina, where this same material is, they find the same material in abundance, and they start to use it in the production of these face vessels, many of which are on display in Hear Me Now, and you'll have a chance to look at them as you see the show. We can move to the next slide. The most well-known enslaved potter from the region is a person who we've come to know as Dave. He's also known as Dave the Potter or David Drake. He's a remarkable figure for several reasons. First, he is a master potter who's able to throw these incredibly large storage vessels. Many of these are on display in the show. These vessels are incredibly difficult to manufacture and manipulate on a kick wheel. So he's for no other reason, he's well known as a master potter for no other reason. But also, like, added to his expertise as a potter, he's also literate, and he signs many of his pots, not only with his name, not only with the date of their production, but also with these rhyming couplets. He writes poems on the sides of these vessels. And the poems are so interesting because they kind of, they're biting, they are humorous, they're wry. You get a really good sense of him and his political sense, but also the way that he was able to articulate really hard political realities of life for enslaved people and kind of steer it through these lines on his pots and these poems. So this particular pot, again, it's on view in the show. 19 days before Christmas Eve, lots of people, after it's over, how they will grieve. He's imagining the time that some of you may know that January 1st was an incredibly difficult time for enslaved people in the South. That was the day called Hiring Day. It was a, now to be clear, enslaved people could be bought and sold and hired out at any time of the year, but January 1st was a keen time where a lot of people would be hired out to distant farms, or they would be bought, or they would be sold. So January 1st was this incredibly difficult time of year where families would be separated and separated forever in many cases. And so as December 6th is happening and he's thinking about the coming of the holiday season, he's also imagining what happens to enslaved families in the immediate aftermath of that holiday season. He's imagining what happens in January 1st, where parents will be separated from children, where siblings will be separated from each other, where spouses will be bought and sold and sent to the four winds. So this is just one example of one of his poem pots. There are several other examples in the show. And because his pots are so monumental, and because he was such an expert potter, because he was literate, because he signed his name and dated them and wrote these poems, he's become probably, well, certainly the best known potter to come out of Edgefield. And I think I'd venture to guess that he's probably the second most famous person to come out of Edgefield, South Carolina, second only to Strom Thurmond. So we have Strom Thurmond and Dave, who both hail from Edgefield, South Carolina. Next slide, please. Another part of the work that we've been engaged in, and to be honest, this is some of the most heartening part of the work for me, is that in the process of doing the research for this material, we've been trying to track and identify, locate, and communicate with Dave's descendants. And so what you're seeing here are the descendants of Dave the Potter, of David Drake, and we have we've invited them to be a part of programming for the museum. We've also been having serious and significant conversations about what this artwork means for their family and their family going forward. I was in Edgefield just last month, actually, and we had a big breakfast. They cooked a big country breakfast for us. It was so good. So the curatorial team, we just kind of entered into, and we've had at each stage in New York, in Boston, here at UMA, and then again in Atlanta as the show moves on. We've had a multi-year conversation that's been going on about how best to protect, preserve, and expand the legacy of Dave the Potter. And this part of the work has been really important to me. Next slide, please. Another thing that we've been doing in the show is highlighting some contemporary artists. It's not just a show about historical pieces. There are also contemporary artists in the show. You're seeing Bumi Badebo here. You saw another image of her earlier in the slide deck. Bumi's ancestors were enslaved on a plantation that's not too far from Edgefield. And as was the case on a lot of Southern plantations, her ancestors were buried on a plot of land at the plantation that was designated for slave burials. She has gone back to that burial site that houses her families, and I don't know any other way to say it except to say she's gone back to the land to which her family has returned in every way, and she's mined that dirt of her ancestral burial site and introduced that soil into her own ceramic practice. And you see an example of that here. You see an example of that here. And so she's made a really deep connection to this area. I should say that for people who haven't been in this Georgia, South Carolina area, the image on the left is not a filter. It's not doctored. This area is known for its what's called red clay, this Georgia red clay. The only other place that I've seen that kind of soil, that kind of dirt outside of Georgia and South Carolina, the only other place I've seen it is in Ghana, that has that same kind of deep red quality to it. And it does really interesting things in the kiln, as you see on the left side. We can go to the next slide now. I've done a disservice, I have to say, to both of these pieces. I apologize, but if you come see the show, you'll see what I'm talking about. On the left, you're seeing a monumental pot produced by Simone Lee, the artist Simone Lee. That pot is about 5.5 feet high. And it is a reflection of an historical Edgefield face vessel, which is about 6 or 7 inches high. So I've put them into scale here. And in the process, I've kind of done a disservice to both of them. But Simone Lee, who a brilliant contemporary artist and ceramicist, has gone back to Edgefield, not to recreate the pots or to redo it, but to commune and convene with them. And so we've put these things into context together in the show to think about the relationships between contemporary artists and these historical objects. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is something that, you plan things and then there are things you don't plan. And this is a part of the show that the curators, we didn't plan for this to happen necessarily in the way that it has. It's a beautiful coincidence that it has happened, but it's been incredibly meaningful for us. Many of you have had the experience of going to museums. At the end of the show, there's a place for response cards. There's a golf pencil and an index card, and you write your responses and you put it in a box. We've all had that experience at museums. Really, as a kind of gesture to what's happening in the show, we decided to just change a little bit of that process, in which we don't have index cards and golf pencils, but instead we have these scratch pads that you don't write on, but you etch on them, right? And so you use a kind of wooden stylus and you etch on them. We meant it as a kind of gesture for what it meant for Dave to etch on clay. And we didn't really have a strong opinion about what would happen to those cards. But what did happen is that the visitor experience with these cards, it has been completely overwhelming. They've been writing incredibly poignant responses. They've taken the opportunity to draw and to etch and to make images. They have completed dozens. I've seen instances where people are doing multiple response cards, like spending a significant amount of time after having convened with the show. They then write these really remarkable responses. And so one of the things that we've been doing and that we didn't expect to do is thinking about how to archive and document these visitor responses. I think we have one more example of these cards to show you in the next slide. And I'll talk a little bit about both of these for what they're doing. On the left, you may notice that this is a call and a response. These are two different people responding on this response card. One person asks a question and then puts their response card on little hooks that are available for people. And then someone else reads that question and writes a response on the same card. So it's even offered this opportunity for visitors to communicate with each other in a way that doesn't often happen at museums. And then again, the one on the right is incredibly powerful and poignant for me, simply because this is exactly what we have in mind, what the curatorial team has had in mind with the show Hear Me Now, is to provide a platform for these enslaved potters to be heard, to be seen in the grandest way possible on the grandest scale. That concludes my comments, and I'm happy to take questions. I really appreciate the invitation. I should have said that at the beginning. Thank you so much for thinking of me on this, and it really has been a great time. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I, as in planning this, of course, I've been looking at the availability of what's out on the web about the exhibit, but I really can't wait to see it in person now too. So thank you so much for talking more about it and giving us this wonderful introduction to the thought process and the work behind it. We will answer questions in a few minutes, so I'll just encourage everyone to think about what their questions are and put them in the Q&A section. And then I have a couple of follow-up things that I thought I would ask you about, and then I'll do some housekeeping before we move to the audience questions. But I've been watching the chat and seeing lots of comments about David Drake. So people have seen shows with his pottery at the Detroit Institute of Arts, I guess, decades ago. And he seems to be well known among, the art historians in the group. So maybe you could just say a little bit more about how is it mostly because he signed his work, or is there more that led to his notoriety, I guess?
Yeah, I should say, and maybe this part is obvious and apparent. Just forgive me for saying it out loud, because it might be obvious and apparent. But for far too long, this material, Edgefield pottery, was not considered a suitable material for museum exhibitions, for sure, but it was discarded as like an unimportant craft material. Even it was disregarded even as a craft material. So there's this huge gap between the production of this material in the 19th century and when it actually kind of registers that this is important material and that it's worthy to be preserved and exhibited and treated seriously. But even during the 19th century, Dave was well known in South Carolina and in locales of great distance. His expertise as a potter was very well known, and wealthy white landowners would commission pieces, not from David Drake directly, but from David Drake's owners, right? So his pieces would be commissioned. He would make specific pieces for particular buyers. So his artistry, just as a potter, was well known in the moment of its creation. It took the world a little bit of time to catch back up to David Drake, and I don't know, it depends on how you count. Do you say the last 10 years or last 20 or last 30? But he has been registered now in fields of art history and in art collection and the like. I think it starts with just the virtuosity of his pottery. I think that's where it starts. If the pots weren't as magisterial as they are, the fact of his signing it might not have garnered as much attention. But the fact that he makes these magisterial pots and he signs and dates them, and he's also a poet. There's no other word for that. He is a poet. And in that sense, the pots become, I don't know whether to call them three-dimensional poems, or like, do we think of them as a three-dimensional textual object, or is it an object that holds text? Like the genre is, it kind of crosses boundaries in an important way. But yes, he's well known now, and I think one of the things that's happening, and this is a recent story, kind of recent history, this is maybe the last 5 or 10 years, is that his work is being traded in an increasingly rarefied and expensive exchange market, where his pieces are going for, really big numbers on the market.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's I love to see exhibitions like this that acknowledge that items can be useful and art at the
Yeah,
same time,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because that hasn't always been the case. So
yeah.
it's nice to see that acknowledgement.
It's been hard for us too, and I mean, it raises a difficult question, and I do not have the answer for this, but it's a question that surfaces because of the show, is to think about what does it mean to refer to an artist who's working in an environment of coercion and extreme violence? Like how to think about the product of that work as artistic, but also connected to coercion and violence and force. It's a hard question. Can art be produced under circumstances of coercion and violence? And if we don't call it art, then what do we call it? So one of the things that people have been asking as the show has been on exhibit is like, what what do we think about it, and how do we manage that difficult line between artistry and coercion and violence?
Right. That is that very difficult realities for sure. Um, well, I will do a couple. I see lots of questions in the Q&A, so I will just do a couple of housekeeping slides and then we'll get to those. So as we've discussed, this exhibition is coming to the University of Michigan Museum of Art, start opening August 26th, and you'll be able to see it through January 7th. So hopefully people will have a chance to come see it in person. And there are lots of wonderful programs and activities related to the exhibition. So keep an eye out for those, because I know UMA also plans to add some more as they firm up speakers and activities. And while you're on campus, you can also view the Clements Library Centennial exhibition in person. It's available Monday through Friday from noon to 4 through November 17th. So this exhibition tries to answer some questions about how we acquire items and what our thinking is behind that. So we're building on a pairing between the 75th anniversary publication, 101 Treasures, which was edited by John Dan. So we take an item from that book and then pair it with something more recent to show how the collection has grown in the past 100 years. So I hope people will also take a moment sometime to view that exhibit. And we do have tours next week as well on August 24th and 25th at 4 p.m. Speaking of August 24th and 25th, it is also student move-in time and welcome week here on campus. So we will have an outreach tent, and due to some construction on our south entrance, our outreach tent is in between Hatcher and Shapiro, sort of that path on its way to and from the Diag and West Engine Arch. So stop by. You can pick up lots of Centennial swag there and say hello to us. And if you enjoy telling people about the Clements Library, you can also sign up to volunteer for events like that. All right, let's see. Oh, I guess this isn't updated yet, but we have we will be reopening our little commerce site that we open from time to time with Bookworm swag and Centennial swag, because I know people have been asking me if we are ever going to make the Bookworm t-shirts and sweatshirts available again. And the answer is yes, we have heard you. So watch your emails for more information. As always, if you're interested in supporting programming at the Clements Library, you can sponsor an episode of the Bookworm or donate to our programming funds. And we're always happy to talk to you more about that. All right, so without further ado, let's see what kinds of question. Oh, Kayla says the store is indeed live. Sorry, my slideshow probably did not update, but the store is live and it's in the chat. So, all right. Wonderful questions. Oh, Sophie, so back at the beginning, the handprint, she wants to know if it was made intentionally.
I can't answer for sure, but my impression, my suspicion is that it wasn't, that this was an accident of the kiln, that there would have been a substance like some oil or dirt, something on the hand of the maker, and as they're moving it into the kiln, it's a huge handprint. You'll see it in the show. Like, you can imagine the body that was attached to this hand, because I have pretty large hands, and it's like it dwarfs my hand. But I imagine that this is just a person who's moving pots into the kiln, and the process of firing the pot immortalized that handprint. Yeah.
Wow. All right.
I should say, and listen, wait, I should say I have a story to tell you about the Boston installation of the show, but this isn't an invitation to do this. I'm just telling you a story. But Ethan, my colleague at Boston, when they installed that particular piece, he went into the gallery at the end of the day and noticed that there was a little smudging on the glass in front of that piece. And so, he cleaned it up, wiped it up, whatever. The next day he noticed more smudging. And at the end of that day, he noticed that there were like multiple handprints. And he finally got it, like after the second or third day, that visitors were coming and putting their hands on the glass. And lots of people were doing that, so that at the end of the day, they had to make a kind of special consideration for that particular piece, that glass had to be wiped clean, like at regular intervals, because as folks were coming into the gallery, they were like communing with that moment, especially. Yeah. I'm not telling you should touch the glass at UMA. I'm just saying, that that's what happened in Boston.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I can see how you would want to do that. So thank you. Oh, Tom is asking a little bit more about the play and environment in Edgefield.
Yeah. So one of the things, I didn't show an example of this here, but we have examples in the show. Ceramics have been produced in this region for thousands of years. The first potters in this area were indigenous potters. And it's a result of Edgefield's curious position geographically, that it's close to a river that runs down, bringing alluvial soils into the region. It's right at a tree line that separates what's called the upcountry from the low country in South Carolina. There's a massive forested area just to the north. And then much of this region, although it's well inland now, much of this region was under the Atlantic Ocean way back in the day. And so the kind of resources in this space, it's a perfect storm to create these really rich clay bodies and clay soils so that you can produce this material. Indigenous folks have been producing ceramics in the area for a long time. We have two examples of indigenous pottery in the show. One is an historical piece, and one is a contemporary piece of a 20th century artist. So yes, it's Edgefield in particular that this can happen. It's a site-specific situation that those soils are incredibly rich for this kind of material.
Thank you. And Pamela's mentioning, I think, sort of acknowledging what you're saying, is that pre-Columbian cultures used figurative and portrait pots as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And are there other pottery sites that are being excavated as well?
Yes, yeah, there are a dozen or so, and we're still looking, but there are a dozen or so pottery sites in the area that we're excavating, that are being excavated now, and we have some of this information in the show to kind of locate you in relationship to where this pottery was happening. So you'll be able to follow the trail of where and how this stuff is being produced. But some of the potteries are still underground or in forested areas. We know that there were more. We have documentation of more than what is than what we know about now. So I think as interest in this material continues and as research continues, we're going to continue to find pottery sites in this area.
So when you say documentation, what kinds of records are you looking at to find out where those were?
Yeah, so we know a lot and a little about um, the landowners, the pottery owners, about their business practices, about who they were buying from and selling to. We know some about the enslaved potters who were working at these area sites. For some of them, we know more than is the case for others. And one of the things that we do in the show, and I intentionally didn't say anything about this because I want you to see it firsthand. When you see it firsthand, is that we've tried to honor both the named and unnamed potters in the area in the show. There's opportunities to respect and commune and convene with them also in the show.
Thank you. So let's see. So related to what the question I just asked is Crystal's asking about a piece of pottery that her family owns from the 1840s and some tips for how to research that
Yeah,
piece.
yes, I'm happy to. It might be more efficient to contact me offline, but there are a range of people working in different disciplines. Archaeologists are doing this work, historians are doing this work, anthropologists are doing this work about identifying and locating. Um, Not only that, chemists are doing this work in some amazing ways. That there have been some of the most fascinating work I've seen actually has been the chemical research into the nature, color, and composition of not only the clay, but also the glazes that are applied to the clay. And so we're now even getting to the point, we're not there necessarily yet, but we're getting to a point where we can read based on clay shards and the like. We can start to read where in the Edgefield district these things might have been produced because they carry certain trademarks or signs of this soil body as opposed to that one. And the soil, although it's rich throughout the area, can differ quite significantly, even in a relatively short distance. So a pottery that's just a few miles from another one can actually differ quite significantly and have certain signatures that mark it. So I'm happy to talk more, probably offline, to connect you with some of the scholars who are doing some of that work.
Perfect. Thank you. Tom is thinking about some of those large pots and wondering about the kilns and fuel consumption, because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
certainly a piece to it as well.
It's mind-boggling to think about. Some of the kilns that that have been excavated, some of the kilns that have been excavated are in excess of 100 feet long. They would have been filled to the brim with ceramics. They have to be fired over the course of a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, maintaining an incredibly high temperature along the way. The amount of wood that would have been required to keep these things burning is unimaginably large. I mean, it really is quite mind-boggling. And so one of the things that we've been trying to emphasize in this show is that the person who touches the pots last, the potter, is really only the person who's touched it last, because you have to fell an incredibly large number of trees. You have to deliver those trees to the kiln site. You have to feed that lumber into the kiln. There are experts who are reading the flame over the course for 24 hours straight. You have to run this in cycles. You can't let that fire or the temperature decrease. So you're running this kiln for 24 hours a day over the course of a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, depending on the size of the kiln. And the experts who are reading the heat are doing it without modern instruments. But still maintaining the temperature of the kiln. And if you don't get all of that right, then nothing comes out of the kiln. And so the levels of expertise and knowledge, and not just brute force, the levels of expertise and knowledge really begin at the start of the process, and they go all the way back to the moment where Dave inscribes his name. Like, there's expertise and knowledge at every stage of the process. I've seen some smaller burnings, like a kiln firings, and even a small kiln firing requires mounds of wood. So to
Right.
do this over the course, to do this all year long, to be doing this in Edgefield heat in July and August, it's mind-boggling, the level of, and that's why this really is an industrial production. It's
Right.
mind-boggling how much labor went into it, how much labor and expertise went into it.
Thank you. So the next couple of questions acknowledge the work around making choices in your exhibit. So Jane is wondering if there are items that you wish could have been included but just didn't work.
Yeah, there are. I have two answers to that. One I'll answer perfectly honestly, and the other one I'll answer politically, diplomatically. I'm being honest here. The honest answer, part one, is that we have a body. Just to take Dave's pottery as an example, we have a body of work that he's produced where he's signed and dated his name, and where he's included these rhyming couplets. We also have shards, just pottery shards that only include his name. We don't have the rest of that pot. So there are poems that have been lost to those waster piles. There are signed pieces that have been lost to those waster piles. We know of we have inscriptions from at least two other potters, named potters, that are on view in the show. So there are other potters as well whose names we just don't know. So there are items that are not included in the show because we've lost the material. We've lost the material to time and to history. At the same time, there are, and I'll just say this, some beautiful examples of Edgefield pottery that are housed both in private collections and in institutional collections that that we, despite our best efforts, we weren't able to include in the show. And I wish that we had been able to do it. And I can say that we fought the good fight about including all of the material that we wanted to include in the show. And we have a fantastic display, but there's like one or two pieces that like I really wish we'd been able to include, and we did our very best to do so. I don't see the Q&A. Oh, wait, I do see the Q&A. There's actually one thing that I wanted to mention in relationship to something that I think was actually in the chat. This isn't going to be news to anyone here, but I just want to say it out loud to underscore it. One of the things about Dave that is everywhere apparent in his signed pieces is that he's etching on clay with an expert hand. He has an expert hand, which is not a small thing to say given the meaning of handwriting in the 19th century. that throughout much of the 19th century and certainly before, your handwriting was, in a way, your calling card. It it was used as a metaphor for your class status. It could be used as a metaphor for your race. People felt that they could read your character in your hand, in your handwriting. And so for Dave to have an expert hand, forget the fact that he's literate and he's writing, but the fact that he has an expert hand when writing in clay, when etching in clay, means that he didn't start writing on clay. He clearly was a literate, writerly person, and readerly as well, given some of the references that he makes in some of the poems that he produced. So he's a readerly, writerly person. And there's somewhere in the chat, I think I saw, what about material that might have been placed on degradable materials, like paper that he might have written on. We don't have any examples of that at our disposal. We don't have any of his kind of written work on paper, but we do know it's pretty clear that you don't become an expert. You don't develop an expert pen by mistake, and you certainly don't develop an expert pen by writing on clay first. So that's one thing that I did want to mention and bring to mind. I'm happy to pull some other things from the questions. Let's see. I see a question about, hey, how's it going? I see a question.
Angela, last power. So yes, if you can read some of these great questions and answer, that would be great.
I'm happy to. How far did the pots travel? So much of this material was used in and around the plantation South, right? So this would have been fine ceramics used for dinner service, but also for kind of utilitarian purposes about what it means to manage a slave plantation. So those big, large scale storage jars and things of that nature would have been used to help manage a plantation. But this pottery was so well known, not only throughout the South, but in the country, that there are examples of Edgefield stoneware in the North, in the Midwest. And so this pottery did travel quite widely, and people were very much aware of what Edgefield pieces meant. And in fact, one of the pieces several of the pieces, in fact, in the show bear the stamp of Edgefield makers. And that stamp operated, at least in some way, as a kind of brand name, that you knew if your stoneware was coming, if your ceramics were coming from Edgefield, that it was of a high quality. So we know that it was traveling quite widely. I see a question about Dave's poetry. Has a complete collection of Dave's poetry been published? So I think already in the chat you have a link to the exhibition catalog that accompanies the show. As a part of that catalog, we have published a full list of Dave's pottery to date. That list was created from a series of lists that were produced and published previously, but that we've since expanded. And I'm sure in the next few years, that list will even grow more as we find even more of his pieces. So there is in the exhibition catalog a full listing of all of his poetry.
That's so lovely. I'm sorry I missed the answers and questions for the last couple of minutes. I don't know why, but now. And the way Zoom works, of course, I can't see if there are more questions because.
Oh, no worries. We'll No, we're happy to fill them. I'm looking through them right now to see if I can pull one up. Oh, this is a really good question. Yeah, this is a really good question from Rebecca about decisions around installation and choices. Yeah, so this material, this isn't particular to Edgefield pottery, but ceramics more generally. It's an interesting material because on the one hand, it is incredibly durable. It will be here when we're gone. These pieces, ceramics will be here when we're gone. It's an incredibly durable material. At the same time, it's deeply fragile. And so what do you do with this really robust, hefty material that has its own gravity? Like some of these large pieces have their own gravity, and yet they're very fragile. They're both in the same. What choices do you make about exhibiting that material uncovered without vitrines or bonnets? What decisions do you make about managing the distance between visitors and the objects? You want them to be able to have a close communion with them, especially etched pieces, signed pieces. There's something about the glazes, about the decoration, the slip trail, that can only really be appreciated when you're on top of the object, when you really see it. And yet, it's incredibly important to protect the material. And so, each venue, to be quite frank about it, has to make their own decisions about how to manage that. Where's the balance? And that balance has to take into account the nature of the visitors, like who are the visitors who come to this place, and the nature of the display and the case of each individual piece. I think, and you tell me if you agree, after August 26th, you can tell me if you agree. I think that we have arrived at a balance in the UMA installation where we've taken every procedure and precaution to protect pieces while also giving people access, and in some cases really close, and in at least one case, unprecedented access, unprecedented as it relates to the other stops on the tour. So I think that visitors will see that we've walked a fine line. I hope that we've walked it well between giving access and installing. There's another question around, this one is more a curatorial or museological, maybe even a philosophical question that we struggled with around the installation, which is, and I made some mention about this earlier, there are some pieces of art whose mastery and majesty is meant to be always already apparent. And so you walk into the Louvre and you see that piece and it just demonstrates its expert nature. It demonstrates its own virtuosity. It doesn't require context. It does its own work. You can fill in the blank about what a masterpiece work might be when you walk into that museum to go see that piece, and it is always already obvious and apparent to you. On the other hand, much of the work that's on display in Hear Me Now has been long disregarded by a kind of museum world. It's not, I don't particularly like this term, it's one that I've inherited, but if I say high art, you know what I mean. I don't actually believe in that as a concept, but if I say it, you understand it as an abbreviation. And so much of this work has been disregarded by that field, but is now entering into the museum. And there are questions about to what extent and how much do these masterful works require context, conversation, discourse? How much do we bring the visitors along, and how much do we just let them convene with this material of and by itself? And so again, we've had to split the difference in some cases, letting some of the pieces be in all of their glory and adding some context clues and context in other places as well. It's not an easy, they're not easy decisions to make, actually. You're always wondering if you've gotten it right.
Yeah, I can see that.
I see a question from Paul. That's a fantastic question about Dave's role and impact as a poet. Well, let me read the whole question. Dave Drake has been getting increased amounts of scholars of American literature as well, yes, alongside other enslaved writers like George Moses Horton. Can you talk a bit more about Dave's role and impact as a poet? Yes. So for much of the time that Dave has been generating attention, it's been about his work as a maker, the work of his hands, right? But increasingly, there's been attention about him as a poet, and like, where does he stand? Where does Dave stand in the canon of 19th century African American literature? I think that's a perfectly legitimate question to ask. And one of the things that we've taken special care to preserve, and a part of his poetry that has not always been obvious or apparent, or a part of his writing that we haven't always attended to carefully, is not just his words, but his syntax. That he does wonderfully interesting things with dashes and commas and colons and spaces, that he's not just writing words. And I think a lot of the early transcription of his poems were just transcriptions of the words, without much attention paid to the syntax. And he works in ways that's not unlike, say, Sylvia Plath, where the playfulness with the language includes not just the words, their measure and meter, but also with the spaces between, with the commas, with colons, with symbols and signs. And so one of the things that we've been really attuned to in that document where we've transcribed all of the known poems is to be really careful about reproducing the poem precisely as Dave wrote it, even with dashes and spaces and lines and some of that playfulness. So I think that there's a whole field of kind of literary studies that's yet not fully tapped about what it means to have this person as a kind of literate writer. Just to take one example that we saw earlier, in the poem about the coming of the new year, he spells grieve, Greave. He does this often, where he'll provide a kind of counter spelling or a counter reading. Sometimes he's really playful in the way that he uses, even in the way that he spells. And it's clear when you take in the entire body of his work that he is a writerly and readerly person. He's not misspelling these words. It's not a misspelling. And I think in a lot of the earliest attention to his writing just assumed, well, he's an enslaved person, of course, and he's just misspelling words. And we see the error, read that material as errors. But the closer you consider it, and certainly as you consider it as a part of the entire body of work, it's clear that he's not misspelling words. He's playing with words. He's playing with spelling in ways that are just really quite fun to think about, actually, to think about how he's managing.
Oh, I love thinking about all those details and how important they are. Oh, Sophie is mentioning grieve connects maybe with bereave.
Yeah. He has this wonderful play on words between peace and peace, between the homonyms peace and peace, in relationship to food. That is Scott. He's making a reference to Scott, who was a enslaved person who's working on the slave pottery, about how when food comes around, Scott always gets a piece, but he spells it P-E-A-C-E. A piece of meat, right? A P-I-E-C-E piece of meat, but also that food and sustenance provides peace. So it's clear from Dave's perspective that like Scott was always first in line. Like, I'm coming to get my piece, in this moment. So there are all kinds of playful things that happen. You'll see more of that in the show.
That's amazing. All right. Well, I still can't see anything else, so I don't know how many we have left. And
there's one question that might be worth considering. I think I may have actually seen it twice, about the response cards. Someone wanted to have the response cards read because they couldn't quite read them. So we might open the response cards and take a moment to look at those again.
Okay.
And again, I'll say that in relationship to the response cards, I think I showed 2 examples or a couple of examples. There are thousands of these. There are thousands of response cards that we're building. So we're building this wonderful archive of responses. So I'll read these for people who may not be able to see it right now. Here's one of them. These vessels of beauty are made with the toil of pain, utilitarian objects now shown in a museum, their value beyond what their descendants could pay to own them. This is a truism, and B, one of the threads of the conversations that we're having with Dave's descendants. That I'll connect this to another thing that's happening in the Q&A and in the chat. This material was produced by African Americans on both sides of the Civil War. That is, both during the period of slavery, but even after the Civil War, a lot of the people who had previously been enslaved on area potteries returned to potteries after the Civil War and continued to work for wages. So this stuff is being produced on both sides of the Civil War. In the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, a significant fraction of this material, I don't know how else to describe it, but a significant part of this material was held by African American families and communities. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to people from the area who said, oh yeah, my grandparent or great-grandparent used to have a lot of Edgefield pottery, and we had it in the house, and we had it on porches, and it was in the backyard. This is the time before this material was highly coveted as display or exhibition pieces. Part of the story of this material is how significant portions of it have been, through various means, some shadier than others, has been co-opted from African American ownership and African American communities, out of those communities into communities of traders and sellers and elite whites in the region. So a lot of the material has been appropriated and misappropriated from Black communities. Now this material is being bought and sold in highly lucrative exchange markets, and less and less, fewer and fewer of the owners of this material are actually African Americans from the region. This material has moved out. And so one of the questions that has been raised, just it's a pointed and blunt question, is what does it mean for Dave's descendants, not only not to own any of this material anymore, but also for this material to have been effectively priced out into really lucrative markets. And just what does that mean ethically as we talk about this material? It's not an easy question to talk about. It's a tough question to talk about. There are no simple solutions to it, but we've been engaged in serious conversations with the family, and just we've been open to continuing that part of the conversation as well. It's not that we can solve the problem. Again, it's not that we have any authority over the material, but we can be a convener even for the uncomfortable parts of the story. We've tried to sit in that discomfort and just be there with all of the parties who are involved. Another response card reads, potter, person, human, artist, friend, lover, brother, once known, always known. And there's a wonderful etching of an Edgefield style pot with hands around it, kind of working the pot. That's also a part of it. I'll say just something briefly on this one. That response card ends once known, always known. One of the curatorial decisions that we had to wrestle with was the vast majority of the people who are working on these potteries, we don't have access to their names. And so how do you hold space for, especially in museum spaces where the object and the artist are so intimately linked? We link the artist and the object very tightly in museum spaces. How do you hold space for the people who are producing this material with the objects themselves? And for a number of reasons, unrecorded artist didn't unrecorded potter, like those, a lot of the standard terms and standard practices that we've inherited from museums and kind of museological practices didn't feel quite right here. And so we entered into an intervention here where we've labeled those objects with a blank underscore, holding space for the name. And then in parentheses, we put the term Potter once known, that this was someone who was connected to a community, whose name was known, who was loved. And we don't have that name now, but we've held that that underscore, hoping that one day we'll be able to fill in some of those blanks, hoping that we'll be able to fill in some of those blanks as attention to this material continues. We can go to the next slide that has the other cards. I'm happy to read those too. This is the question answer one, the one that's so fascinating to me, that someone writes on a card and then someone comes back after and responds to it. So it reads, how many museums, private collectors, and white families own the pottery, quilts, and other artworks made by enslaved ancestors? ? And then there's an answer in what is clearly a different handwriting. My ancestors were slaveholders in Kentucky. These are not skeletons in a closet, but ghosts that walk with me every day. And so again, there's this really interesting convening between visitors and the person who wrote that question probably will never know that someone responded to it. And the person who responded to it may never know who wrote that question, but still they're kind of convening with each other in this moment. And the last response card that I showed reads, I'm listening, I'm listening, I'm listening, I hear you, I see you. Which again was, I just want to say thanks, I guess. That was the point. Like, that's what we've been aiming for with this show. So that was one question I thought helpful to read those, especially some people may be joining us on their phones or don't have access to screens.
Yes, thank you. I think that was a lovely idea. Well, should we wrap up for this morning? And I'll send you a list of the questions in case there are any further discussions that need to happen. But this has been amazing. And we really appreciate you taking the time and this scholarship and what you've put together with your co-curators and all of the other people that you've involved in this process. It's really fantastic. So everyone, mark your calendars, book your flights if you need to.
That's right.
And,
yes, please come on in. Yeah.
Yes. Or if nothing else, at least look at it online and listen to the audio guide that goes along with it. So we thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll send out an email later with the recording in case you want to share it with anyone else. And it'll also have links to those resources that we mentioned. So thank you, Jason, and have an amazing birthday weekend. And thank you so much for being here.
I appreciate it. Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody.
I know.